Deep in the trenches of 2006 pop culture, there lived a dorky little girl who couldn't keep her nose out of a book. Luckily for her, there was a massive surge in YA fantasy novels and series that could transport her to different worlds. One series stood out more than the rest. It stood out more than Harry Potter, more than The Hunger Games, and even more than anything a sparkly killer vampire boyfriend could offer. Percy Jackson and the Olympians had her heart. I've been thinking a lot lately about growing up and everything that came along with, especially when it came to having fun and what brought me the most joy. And I feel like all that I watch on YouTube lately is retrospectives of my favorite TV shows growing up, and my favorite dolls, and my favorite toys. And I feel like after a lot of thought, it all kind of comes back to my love for history. It was always my favorite subject in school growing up, and it drove the way I played games and the way I made stories up in my head with all of my toys in my room. And so I think that's why Percy Jackson just struck me more than the others. It was rooted in actual history and folklore and storytelling, and that just gripped me a lot more. And even today, I find that my favorite pieces of media, my favorite movies and shows and books, they're all period pieces and historical topics and historical fiction. You know, it all comes back to the same thing. I think I started thinking about this, and I realized it pretty recently when I was in a museum and I saw a sculpture in that museum of Perseus defeating Medusa. The little light bulb went off in my head when I remembered his adventure in The Lightning Thief when he defeated her. And it was so down to earth and like Greek mythology in a way that a kid could understand. And I thought, maybe I learned more than I thought while falling in love with that series. And maybe I should try and resurface it and look a little deeper and try to teach myself about it again. But with Percy Jackson alone, I know I don't have the full story. And that's exactly what I want. I want a clearer picture of the history, the people behind the history, and everything that made this worth preserving and studying. I want to start with ancient Greece and give the me of 2006 the explanations that she deserves. So maybe you've never learned about this, and maybe you, like me, can only credit the YA series for your limited knowledge of Greek gods. But wherever you're at, let's take a look together. Welcome to Rabbit Hole History. So I want to start from the beginning, kind of a 30,000-foot view of general ancient Greek history. I guess the top of the rabbit hole before we fall into it. Ancient Greek civilization as we know it began around 1200 BCE until about 323 BCE following the death of Alexander the Great. This era was preceded by the Mycenaean civilization, which was a prehistoric civilization whose capital was Mycenae. Mycenae is fabled to have been founded by Perseus and described as a well-founded citadel. I actually had to look up what a citadel was. I've always heard the word, but I never really knew what exactly it was. And it turns out it's basically a fortified town or city. Anyway, Mycenae was referred to in many tales and recounts. Many precious artifacts of gold, bronze, and ivory have also been discovered there. Unfortunately, this nation and city were burned down, potentially by a division of Greek civilization known as the Dorians, and existed only as a smaller city-state, while the rest of what we know to be ancient Greece kind of really took shape. Now, what happened next following this collapse is kind of what is considered a dark age for the region. The literacy of the Mycenaean people was lost and forgotten to time, but over time, a new modified alphabet emerged and written records began to appear. From there, they began to expand and colonize, and the modern names of these colonies are still seen today, from Syracuse to Naples and many more. During the 6th century BCE, these colonies began to organize themselves separately from their founding cities, but still considered themselves part of Greece. These cities are called polis, which is basically a city-state and directly translates to city. This is how the basis for government was formed, and interestingly enough, they were called monarchies, no matter how small the city. The leaders of these city-states, or polis, were called kings, or basileus. Anyway, One of my sources actually calls this nomenclature misleadingly grand just because of how small these city-states were. I mean, if you look at the geography of Greece, they're very small islands. It was kind of hard to take up any land. But because land was scarce and they had these city-state monarchies in place, the power rested in a smaller class of landowners. So a lot of fighting and skirmishing during this time was over land shortage and who could take over who. So while this system was kind of fleshing itself out, there ended up being 4 main colonies that were the most dominant and powerful in political world affairs. And those were Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes. These were the 4 cities that were able to acquire the most surrounding rural areas and win in the most skirmishes, and Athens and Corinth ended up being the top merchants by land and sea due to their geographic advantages. And this time period also brought about the Persian Wars, which came about due to the colonies in Ionia, which are closer to modern-day Turkey, being unable to maintain their territory and independence from the Persian Empire. The Greeks, particularly the Athenian army in Athens, rose up and revolted against the Persians and eventually pushed them back across the Aegean Sea. So with this victory came even more power and dominance for Athens as a leader and capital of sorts for the Greek city-states. They basically were the entire navy, commercial center, and home to the most wealthy and successful citizens. Athens became where most preserved and celebrated Greek culture was born. The Athenians were able to focus on philosophy, drama, architecture, literature, everything that we really remember Greek history and culture for. And that's where I'm going to pause my descent into the rabbit hole of ancient Greece for this week. I'm most interested in learning about these more cultural themes anyway, and in the coming weeks I plan to dive headfirst into a new topic. So this is Rabbit Hole History. My goal is to better understand what makes people people. I think my love of history goes hand in hand with my desire to learn about people and how they live and why they are the way that they are. So with each week for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to dive into a new topic about ancient Greek history and explore each subject in a way that helps me to better appreciate the life and times of our ancestors. I hope maybe you like learning this way too. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope that you join me in going down the rabbit hole for these next couple of weeks. Thank you for listening and tuning in this far, and I'll see you next week.